I guess, we'll continue with what we had planned to do last week, but had to move it today. Just a reminder, really, it's just a continuation of our discussion on, I guess, applied valuation, where really the goal is to take you guys through a bit of this journey of how you think through kind of building a model for what, for trying to formulate an opinion on what the fundamental value of a company might be. If you want to do this as well as you possibly can, it's like a lot of intermediate steps in that process. And part of the way that I tried to structure this exercise is to highlight that by showing the iteration that we go kind of step by step. We start with something that's kind of a very naive cartoon of what the value of a company, for instance, we decided to take a look at Amazon, right? We only had the time in our last lecture to go through one model. The importance of spending a lot of time talking through that model was also to be comfortable with like the template that was laid out with the valuation, right? Where we kept track of where do we get all the underlying data that we make use of in order to build our model? What are the things that we invariably need to go and forecast out if we want to do a fundamental valuation? When I say a fundamental valuation, let's be clear, I'm really thinking NPV with WACC, where we forecast out cash flows for a few periods. We have an estimate of WACC. As I said, I'm not focusing on estimating WACC in this, in last session or this one. And where we get, a terminal value for a company after a few periods, again, either using a multiples-based approach or using a terminal perpetuity-based approach. But the question is how would you go about trying to get, different versions of valuation for companies like this? The first thing you need to be comfortable with is, lay out your template in a way that works for you. So I lay it out a certain way and they look like a mess to you, in which case, have your own version that you're good with, right? My template would actually usually have less stuff, but I wanted to break everything down piece by piece so that you guys could just see it anyway. Right. And another thing to keep in mind was, that valuation that we went through. I'm not going to rehash everything we did, but I think it's very important that anytime you do a valuation of a company, you try to make sure you have as much clarity and transparency around the assumptions you make. So, like this valuation that I got, that valuation comes from making these assumptions so that you can have a sense of well, which of these do I actually believe? Which of these do I think are actually probably super wrong? And which ones am I just kind of, I'm guessing, anyone's guess is as good as mine kind of thing. So, first valuation just did simple things that we didn't actually believe, right? I looked at historical data, but only looking at historical data of Amazon, not of any, I didn't get any other external data, right? And I did just naive extrapolations, right? Oh, let's assume that the growth rate will be same as the growth rate of during this historical period, things like that, right? The goal here was not to be accurate. It was just to have a starting point. That's literally the goal here, is to have a starting point. Good to have standardized starting points because it can act like a little bit of a sanity check if you're going to end up doing a bunch of valuations. It also can help for me to understand kind of how you navigate your iterative process on evaluation when I wasn't part of doing that, right? Because at least you can start me at a common place where I kind of get it already. Because maybe we start at the same place with similar stylized, simplistic rules. And then okay, well, if you start there, this is the number you get. Now let me show you my actual opinions and how they deviate from the first pass judgments and how each of those things change value. Do we kind of agree? That actually can help us all collectively better understand, do we agree with each other on this valuation? And it can help us focus into what exactly it is that we believe that's non-mechanical. That's an important source of what we think market prices, where market prices come from, and also where, like, why we think that valuation is different from what, like, should be different from what market prices are at, right? And so now we kind of start talking through doing, further iterations of our valuation. Again, with the first pass, there are some building blocks that we use again and again and again in every valuation that I do, right? And pretty much, I think any valuation that you guys would do, right? So you remember, like I had highlighted, like some of the procedural takeaways to get. It's like remember you want to kind of get your cash flows per cash flow formula, and then to get each piece of the cash flow, there's some pretty standardized rules of thumb that people use to get these numbers, right? To forecast EBIT over time really boils down to revenue forecasting and margin forecasting, those two things, right? To get the tax rate, there's some tax forecasting. People don't tend to like do that much there. I mean, unless you have a view that tax rates are going to change because of policy stuff, but I'm not even going to try to tackle that now because that's not my thing for sure. And by the way, I also think this is useful, right? It's useful to have some awareness of like, what are the things that you think you can forecast well? And what are things that you think like you could try to forecast it, but like, your forecast is going to be no better than surveying random people off the street. If that's the case, you probably don't want to hang your hat on a valuation that's all about that type of forecast, right? So like I would never hang, this is not a hat, I don't know what it's called, a hairband. I would never hang my hairband on a tax forecast for myself. Rules around amortization, CapEx related forecasting. We had said CapEx related forecasting is a little bit different because you tend to not make it proportional to revenue. You tend to instead make it proportional to next period change in revenue, because CapEx is about, creating growth, and you have growth if you've got, and these are all things we remember. Yes. If not, you can kind of take a look through the spreadsheet, but this is important to remember because that's a building, like I use those same building blocks everywhere else in our valuations. I just change some of the details of where I get some components of this. We had done a sensitivity analysis as well, where we had pretty much identified that the things that are going to move value a lot were going to be revenue forecasting, margin forecasting, and the assumptions we make around terminal value. We have found like, the precise numbers that we use for, getting our tax, amortization, CapEx related stuff changing. Like, look, it moves value, but it was like second order compared to those other things that I mentioned, right? Revenue, margin, and two different ways of thinking through terminal value. And so because of that, this, by the way, informs me what iteration I want to focus on with my valuation, right? I'm going to spend more time thinking about how can I do a better job on the things that matter most to my final answer. Logically makes sense, right? Now, I know I can't do like a perfect model. I'm not, that's beyond my pay grade. So not even going to try, but I will try to do a better job on those key things. And I'm going to try to go, piece by piece. So first iteration, let's just try to do a better job on one thing. The one thing I'll try to do a better job on is revenue forecasting, because that was one of the big things where we seem to drive value. How can you do a better job? Look, there's a variety of different ways that you could go in trying to do a better job with revenue forecasting. You could be a little less simplistic with extrapolating off of past data, because I was super simple. I was like, let's just take the average revenue growth rate over the past and just assume that stays steady. You could try to fit a different curve that like makes a different set of assumptions, like, oh, well, Amazon's been growing fast. There's been a bit of an uptick even relative to fast because of the pandemic. So maybe the pandemic thing is going to subside, and maybe, like most high growth companies, Amazon will have a steadily declining growth rate, right? So you could try to like think of a way to model that kind of generic life cycle view of a high growth company. And you could try to do it a little bit by trying to see to what extent growth has been slowing down, again, netting out whatever happened during the pandemic. Everyone agrees, like that's one way we could go. Just basically, a more nuanced view of the past data. So far, so good. We could do that. And then, by the way, so let me mention one thing about my first past model. Everything I did in this model, so for instance, if you kind of just went and changed some of these revenue numbers, everything else that relies on revenue would automatically change. So everything in my spreadsheet, I kind of did formula style, where like if you change a number in one place that affects things elsewhere, it automatically adapts. Because you can imagine, like you want to do things this way. If you want something you can play with, right? If you don't do it that way, you change the number there, and then you need to change it in 7 other places. Yeah, that's going to be an even less enjoyable experience. So you also want to build that habit. Have your mod, like that's what I mean by like setting up something like this template style. It's that like when you change something, it changes everywhere else where it needs to change. And that's one of these things you get good at it with practice. Like you don't get good at it by me showing you formulas right now. Like that's not effective to your journey on this. But doing it yourself is like super helpful. And like the way that I did this, I can literally copy paste this entire sheet and paste it in another sheet, which is what I do in my first refinement. Literally this sheet, I copy pasted the first one. What I put in a black box, gray, that's the only stuff I change from the other thing. And then it changes everything else where revenue would show up automatically. Right? And this is basically my first iteration. My first iteration is I'm going to come up with revenue numbers. That's the only thing I'm changing. Revenue numbers in a different way than what I did the first time, because I think I can do a better job. Hopefully you guys think I can do a better job too, because we started really with like the low-hanging fruit kind of naive approach, right? So the question is, how do I get these numbers instead of the ones I showed you before? Right, so as I said, one approach that you could use, it's not the one that we're going to use here, but one approach would be just like, have an understanding of Amazon as a company. Okay, it's high growth, probably going to have declining growth more long term. So interpret the data that you see from the past in the lens of that view on the life cycle of these types of companies, right? So that's one way. That would be like a purely statistical way to try to do it. Better statistical model of the historical data. So always an approach that you can use. It's not the approach I'm going to use here. Instead, I think it's more informative in kind of, changing the way we do it to introduce, another option that we have, which is to bring in more data, right? Don't just use those like 5 to 10 years of historical data. I think I put 5 in the stuff that I listed here. But instead, think a little bit more about Amazon and its main business activities and which markets those things are in, right? By, again, as I said, so bringing in other data. So that's what I do here is I bring in extra data and I do look more carefully at Amazon's financials as well. So in particular, in this case here, I look at Amazon's financial statements and get information on Amazon's different business segments. It's got 4 main business segments. By the way, anything where I'm using at bringing in data okay, so for the segments, it's really easy to get from Bloomberg. So I didn't give you a link to the place to get it and stuff like that. So if you go Bloomberg FA function, there's a segments part. All that information was obtained from there. right? So this is where I get all of this stuff. So just to tell you guys a little bit about it, right? It's like, what does Amazon do? Amazon does a few different things. They've got the Amazon online store. You've got also on their online store all these mysterious third parties that sell stuff on Amazon, where you may find yourself buying more and more stuff from them without necessarily always realizing it. This happened to me and I'm still annoyed by it. Right, so those two segments of the shit you buy on their store. There's AWS, which is, you know, the I guess the shit cloud service providers buy from them to help, you know, provide their cloud services. You know, that's been quite important, by the way. And other. Other is literally the category. Actually, for other, I combined two things from Amazon's financial statements. I combined the category that they call other, which is a bit of a black box to me, and then like their physical stores. So I kind of included physical stores because I was like, I looked at the pattern with physical stores. I'm like, you know, I don't feel that they need to think about modeling that. So I've got these four components, and you know, this stuff, like these numbers here, these numbers here, these numbers here, those are basically like the revenue from each of these segments at different years in the past. So far, so good. Yeah. Then I bring in external data. The external data that I bring in is data on the US e-commerce market. And I get that data, in my case, from eMarketer. And here are the actual links to the reports in public domain that I specifically use to get my numbers. So all of my numbers, you know, you can get them from there. And so we get, you know, what is the aggregate, you know, volume of revenue. I also, it's not just e-commerce. I looked at retail and e-commerce. Right. So for retail, 2017, about 5.2 trillion. Meanwhile, about 450 billion for retail e-commerce. So I get those numbers here for the historicals. I also get forecasts. So I'm just piggybacking on the hard work that eMarketer does to try to like size up the future of, you know, several interesting and important markets. So this is important, is I'm getting future numbers as well here. I'm going to rely on that for getting some of my numbers. So far, so good. And then what do I look at? I start to look at, you know, things like, you know, what is the year-on-year change, you know, from here to here, 18.5%, yada, yada, yada. You know, and then I also look, you know, what is the percentage of Amazon online store of retail e-commerce? And okay, fine. 2016, it's 23.5%, 24.1, 23.5, 23.6. Bump up during the pandemic, 24.9. Do the same thing for third party. It seems a little bit different. This one seems to be steadily increasing, right? From 5.9%, you know, to 10.2%. Actually, like kind of remarkably linear. Then I do something that may feel a little bit weird to you. AWS, I take a look at AWS revenue as a percentage of e-commerce revenue. So I'm not doing market share of your own market. I'm doing market share of a different market, right? That's kind of like, you know, I'm kind of using e-commerce as an analogy market. So that like, you know, I'm using, like, this is debatable, by the way. You guys could be like, Jira, this sounds like donkey shit. And, you know, we could have an open debate about that. Right, but so I look at, you know, as a percentage of e-commerce, what's happening here? Okay, it's going, you know, it seems to be kind of going up, but maybe slowed down a bit during the pandemic, which actually might make sense because maybe development of new things that get built on AWS got slowed down a bit during the pandemic. right? Look, what would we probably all have preferred to do in this context? It would be nice for me to go get like also eMarketer or Statista forecasts of, cloud. I just didn't do it. Okay, but one could do that, and that might actually be better than what I'm doing. It probably would be better. The only thing with cloud is cloud means a bunch of different things, and so I would have to like better educate myself on to what extent I think like the AWS segment of the cloud is representative of all cloud, or can I zone into that specific segment, right? So that would just require me to like do some digging into what markets have these types of forecasts on, so on and so forth, right? So so everyone understands, like we could do that if we had more time, might as well. But I chose not to do this. So as a result, my use of the e-commerce market here, I call that an analogy market. I'm just saying, like, if I look at percentages relative to this other market, like the trend I see there, I think can kind of project into the future, right? What would be other examples of analogy markets? Maybe like consumer drones. Maybe you project out consumer drone revenue by looking at the dynamics of the action camera market. Right, every consumer drone at this stage has an action camera within it. The users that, consumers that buy drones, the enterprise drone is a different thing, right? But like, consumers that buy drones are probably also consumers that buy GoPros and shit like that, right? So like there are reasons to believe that these things should zig and zag a little bit together. I think that's a more tenuous assumption here. Although, I mean, to the extent that like e-commerce is an important driver of cloud-based services, then it's maybe not so terrible, right? Everyone okay with everything I'm saying so far? Right, so I take a look at percentage of e-commerce. I see, look, I mean, this also seems to be kind of trending up. I don't put a lot of weight on the fact that it was that it did not trend up last year, because I know that, the money that AWS makes requires, efficient, software development to be happening on the cloud, the more forward-facing cloud service provider end. And that may very well have been slowed down a little bit. Again, we could debate, So we take a look at the data, we formulate a view, and then different people can formulate a different view from what we see. But I see like generally seem this is kind of like trending up. This is trending up. This is kind of oscillating. It's not right. It's not I don't see anything where this is telling me this is going up or going down. So I actually like to look at this data super simplistic way. Does it seem to be oscillating around the mean, or does it seem to be trending up, trending in? Right. And in this case, like it seems pretty clear, oscillation, trending. And then what about other? Other, I also just anchor to e-commerce. We can see it was trending up, spikes up in 2018, then seems pretty steady. By the way, this spike up is basically when Amazon launched their physical stores. So I'm like, I don't think this is going to trend up, because it hasn't trended up over the last 3 years. The big motion that we've seen here was because of the launch of physical stores. Like, I'm going to take this as oscillating around this number. Yeah, who knows? Maybe there's going to be the big bang on physical stores later, in which case I'm wrong. I'm pretty certain this is not what's moving the needle in valuation, because it's just quite small right now. Everyone okay with how I'm looking at data so far? Yes. Yeah.
Like for us, how do we know like eMarketer is the place to find?
Yeah, like that's one of these things you need to kind of like, keep track of notes and have your go-tos, right? So so here, look, this is what I'll say. So I can really comment mostly on like technologies, right? Because those are the markets that I pay to something like more attention to. But things like eMarketer, Statista, Forrester Research, IDC, which not the university called IDC, but the International Data Corporation, which is a consultancy that specializes in, among other things, sizing up markets. Gartner Group, right? So those would be like the 5 things that I try to see, what do they have in public domain, and does McGill have a paid license on something?
Okay, so
And but it, at first, by the way, let me be clear, it'll feel like a bit daunting and a bit frustrating because you kind of need to like figure it out, right? Like, but that's actually a good experience to go through, because like the places you go to for this information are going to change over time. So, I think it's good to build this habit of like,
so those things are not something like we can just Google in the Bloomberg, just search. They have to like keep it like kind of.
oh, yeah, some of it may be on Bloomberg. Google on Bloomberg. Okay. That's when Google is in a very happy place. When it's a verb, not not a specific use of online search. But you can also Google, like you could literally Google, e-marketer, e-commerce market forecast, and like you'll pop to there.
Okay, yeah.
Right. So you can try stuff like that. The other thing I would say is when you read research of analysts, pay attention to what their raw sources are for things like this. Right. So I would recommend having, something like this where you just kind of jot down like, okay, this is useful shit that people don't teach me in the classroom, but that I think I can use over and over again. Right. So absolutely. Yes.
What's a good place to look at analyst reports?
I mean, I don't know exactly what the product is called at this point because they changed the name a few times, but I guess like Thompson One, and it may be called Icon now or something.
Yeah.
So I think like that's a good place to go. You can also get some stuff from Bloomberg, but it's just much less. But again, with some of this stuff, like I'm less concerned about getting access to like a large volume of analyst reports. You just don't have the time to read through that stuff anyway. Like I would pay more attention of like find a couple and try to really understand what they did and try to pay close attention to where they source their information. So I would think it's more valuable to look at a few like well than to look at many very casually. All right, so what do I do next? The red stuff is always my forecasts, okay? Like that's uniform pretty much almost everywhere in all of my sheets. So what do I do next? I use the projections of e-commerce along with taking a stand on what these percentages are going to be in the future. Because if I know e-commerce and I know your revenue is a certain percentage of e-commerce, and multiply those two things together, by definition, I've got our revenue for that segment. Yes? So that's all I do. And I just do very simple rule, but I think it's actually a pretty good rule, actually, which is I said just split into two cases, trending versus oscillating. So what do I do when it's oscillating? I just effectively say, you know what? Next period, number is probably going to be pretty close to last period, but it'll mean revert to that oscillation, level. Right. And so what do? We could have done it slightly differently, right? But I just said, I'll make next year's number this year's number. And then I calculate an average of this number over these 5 years. And I say, that's the number that will, mean revert to by the end of my forecast period. So by the end of my forecast period, 23.9% is exactly the average here. And look, I've got a formula here, right? And people look at this formula and sometimes they're like, I don't know what's happening. It's not complicated. All this is saying is, this number here is basically, if we look at the most recent number, and subtract the average number, right? That's what I expect the fall will be from next period to the end period. This is the amount of time between next period and end period. So this is like what we expect the change every period to be. I'm having it fall in linear increments. I mean, we could change some of these details. Like, I don't think that's particularly important, but like, I'm going linear here. So it's like a linear mean reversion. It's not like mean reversion that's kind of more of a geometric pattern. You could have said like, well, actually, I would expect it to start mean reverting right away instead of staying at the same level up here. You tell that to me, I'm like, sure, seems equally plausible to me. Go ahead and change that. I suspect that wouldn't change materially our numbers. So the spirit of what I'm doing, we're all good, right? So yeah, so the oscillation, right, case, I just say like, assume some sort of mean reversion to the longer term mean. So if you're a little bit higher right now, you'll be a little bit higher the whole way, but it'll be progressively less and less above that mean, and it eventually gets to it. I mean, seems sensible to me. So that's what I do here, and then once I've got those numbers and these numbers, multiply them together, that's how I got these forecasts of revenue numbers for Amazon's online store. We okay with that? And by the way, you guys can check everything. It's all formula style, right? Boom. Boom. So if someone is like, dude, I think you're totally wrong with this, change this to 277, boom, everything adapts. I'll change that back before I forget. Oh, folks, okay, when we continue? So now what do? In the other case that I talked about where I said trending, and here the trending cases are trending up, but I would kind of do the same thing if it was trending down as well. So it's pretty much the same mathematical rule. Is all I say to myself is, again, the details can change a little bit from scenario to scenario, but I say to myself, what, over the last 5 years, what's been the rise? It's been the difference between this and this. So I take the difference between this and this, and then divide it by the number of years that rise occurred. So that means over the last X years, this has been rising on average by X% per year. Trending down, it would be this has been falling by X% per year. And all I do is I extrapolate it, right? I'm not trying to overthink it here. I just extrapolate it. You might say like, okay, it'll keep going up, but it'll slow down. You could change that if you want, right? But I'm just going to say like, look, Amazon third-party stuff, we're like still sufficiently early in the growth phase that it'll still be kind of growing faster in the next 5 years. And that's my standard. And that's, and so all I do is I say, look, this period here, the number is last period grown by that increment of the historical increment over the last 5 years. And then I just do it over and over and over again. And that's where I get my numbers. Are we okay with this? Are folks okay with me just saying for AWS, I did the exact same thing as Amazon third party, but using the numbers for the AWS percentages of retail e-commerce, because that's also a trending up case. Right? So just notice that oscillation, trending up, the formulas that I use are different because one is mean reversion, the other one is extrapolation. That's it. And then for other, I did oscillating, but instead of oscillating using the 5 years of data, because of what I knew about online physical stores, I did oscillating with this 3-year average. So are we kind of okay with all this? Does that make kind of, again, you can all, I think I have posted this online, right? Or no, was it sent out?
It's online.
It is on, okay, yeah, so I don't know what's where. My goal every day is to remember if I need to pick up my son. It's way beyond my. Thank God you guys have the team. Serious. So let's see. Then all I do is I add up the revenues of the different segments to get an aggregate revenue for the company. And that is how I got those numbers that I changed in that refinement. Literally nothing else changed from the first pass to this first refinement. So by the way, I do want to point out one thing. I think I had told you guys this last time, but I'm still proud of it, so I'll tell it to you guys this time as well, which is these are my numbers for my revenue forecast. Like, I've laid out very transparently what I'm doing, right? These are the average these are the average forecast numbers for Amazon revenue 2021, 2022 from like professional analysts. You find this on Bloomberg. Pretty damn good. I mean, what does damn good mean? You know? Oh. Don't know why. I mean, I guess my goal would be to have a forecast that differs from the market that is correct. So I'm not good in that way, right? But, it does give me some confidence that I'm starting to understand what important participants in the market think. By the way, this doesn't prove that, but it gives me actually some level of comfort that I'm not, being an idiot here. So by the way, I would do this. I would do as a sanity checker these things, especially because here, we all agree, right? In what I'm doing here, it's not like I'm working super hard to come up with like a real subtle observation about Amazon. Like, that is not what I'm doing here. And by the way, that is not what I'm going to be doing in any of the stuff I showed you. Because I think I told you guys, like, my endpoint in our discussion here is where I feel like I've made sense of it about what the market thinks. And actually, that's almost like, that's like the end of level one in some sort of, I don't know what video games, people play now, like Super Mario Brothers or something, but they're like, the real levels start, when you start saying like, what is my own thesis that I think differs from what the market thinks? And how does that impact my view of value, of fundamental value? And do I feel confident enough about that to take an alpha bet? Right? Like all that part, which is actually hard, the real hard work, like I'm not even touching that here. Like, I looked at Amazon, the afternoon before our first lecture. If I came here and said, like, I think I can tell you guys a bunch of, meaningful stuff like that, you probably shouldn't believe me. Like that actually takes real work. Like trying to make sense of the market is actually the easier part. Are we okay here? All right. So that's our first refinement. So now let's talk about the first refinement. I posted this online as well, yes? Yeah. Okay. Right. So, what I want to say first refinement is just, we just solely focus on, let's try to do a better job with revenues. Useful to note, there's a bunch of different strategies people can use for revenue forecasting. And these were just like, the Dean talked a bit about these before, right? So, as you know, top down, bottom up, hybrid. We went hybrid in the sense of most of what we're doing is top down, but we went a little bit bottom up in style by breaking down by segment. So that's what I mean by that. Pretty much anything, anytime you do something serious in practice, oftentimes you'll be triangulating between both. So at the end of the day, almost everything becomes hybrid. But it is useful to kind of realize like what is the spirit of top down, what is the spirit of hybrid, and to what extent in your implementation you can borrow some of the good elements of both in your exercise. We okay with this? So what is our second refinement? Perhaps not surprising, is that the next one is margins, right? We went through our list, okay, revenue, that's, a big deal. Margins, that's going to move the needle. And then, as you can imagine, maybe third and fourth refinements are going to focus on terminal value. Okay. But hopefully you feel like the way the story is being told, the ordering of the chapters, like seems pretty sensible. Oh, by the way, one thing I didn't do is tell you what the valuation is in the first refinement. After like improving my revenue forecast. So again, this is a bit outdated because that was from 2 weeks ago. But the numbers I now get are 2.2 trillion and 1.13 trillion. So I'm still like way up. Maybe the average is a bit better than before, but the reason why I almost forgot to tell you this is because at this stage, I don't actually give that much of a shit if I'm getting much closer or not. The reason is like, I already established that, you know, I need to do more than one refinement to have something that I think is semi-believable. So the fact that I just do, it's not something where I'm always going to say to myself, every refinement needs to take me 17% closer to the final answer. Like if you do that, you're kind of cheating, you know what I'm saying? So I do the refinements and I try to do them in good faith. I lay out what my refinements are going to be ahead of time so that I don't like, you know, give you guys really misleading examples where I just kept on doing refinements until I got close. And then I'm like, okay, now I can bullshit my way through this, right? No, I pick my refinements ahead of time. And my hope is that I get pretty close. That it's not where I say like, oh, I'm still far. I need to like reverse engineer another refinement. No, like the 4 refine, like that was why we did that sensitivity analysis. The sensitivity analysis was what was guiding my decision of what refinements I would do. I am deciding them ahead of time. I don't cheat by like you know, anchoring my answer every time to say like, okay, I think I can get away with this. So I don't even know if on average I've gotten to a closer answer because I didn't bother checking. And it's only partially because I'm lazy, right? I think like the real argument I gave is a legitimate one. Okay, but as I said, right, a priori, we identified that we probably want to think about margins a little bit differently. So how do we do that? Right, again, same thing as I said before, right? We could kind of look at the historical data on margins and model them in a more complex, nuanced manner that like tries to make predictions about how margins change over time, because I had just taken an average margin over the last X number of years, right? So you could try to do, you could try to do more with that data. Again, that's not the approach I take here. The approach I take here is to get more data. Now the approach but I'm not getting data from eMarketer or anything like that now. Instead, you know, what I think about is like, you know, what are some of the usual suspects for why margins change? Right. Well, there's one very big usual suspect in a multi-division or multi-segment company, which is you may have a very profitable division and a less profitable division, right? And if the very profitable division grows faster than the less profitable one, average margin should go up. If you're in an unlucky scenario where it's the not profitable division that is growing faster, then we expect margins to go down, right? So this is, by the way, usual suspect is, you know, if you can try to formulate a view of what profitability across different divisions might be. We've already said something about what we expect revenue growth in those different divisions to be. So we take a stand on which ones are becoming a bigger percentage of the overall revenue flow. Everything I'm saying seems sensible, right? So I do this with Amazon. It's not the same division breakup as what we had before, where I go AWS, third party, main online store, other. So I don't break it up quite that same way, but we could. There's a bit of a challenge. So actually a practical bit of information, which is trying to model like time variation and margins with this multi-division perspective. There is a bit of a wrench in trying to execute that in practice, which is companies are required to disclose some segment level information. but they're not required to tell you everything about the segments. In fact, like pretty much what you usually find is segment breakdown of revenues. And quite often you'll find very little more than that. Right? What that means is for many companies, you know, you can't go straight to the source, i.e. straight to that company to get the margins per division. And so then you usually need to use comparables. Like, okay, you know, this company is in this industry. Let me try to find information on the profitability of that industry, maybe by looking at pure, like close to pure plays in that sector, yada, yada, yada. Everyone okay? Like that's one way one could try to go do it. You try to get a ballpark sense of what this segment's profitability will be, but by looking externally, either at industry research on margins or by looking at the data of more pure play comps to that segment. Okay, so that's two avenues. I didn't do that with Amazon. Right. And honestly, I wouldn't have had time to be able to do that, you know, given that again, it was basically the afternoon before our first lecture. But Amazon is actually, this is actually the main reason I picked Amazon, actually, is I do know that Amazon gives a bit more information. Not a lot more information, but a bit more information that's extremely useful and I think very material in this context. Because the one thing I know about Amazon is people make a very big deal about the fact that AWS, even though it's still a small percentage of revenue, it makes up like 50% of Amazon's net income in recent times. Like I know this because this is like splattered all over the news. So what that tells you is AWS margins are like mega higher than everything else Amazon does. So like I knew that in the background. So I was like, okay, you know, I know that with Amazon, I'll be able to make an easier to execute margin analysis for you guys. But hopefully you guys realize like the exact thing that I'm doing from Amazon here, like it's not something that we can always do. So sometimes you have to do more work to get information to take a stand on segment level profitability. We okay with this? So let me show you the data that, I mean, I can even go straight to the source. Boom, boom, boom. These are the SEC filings. I don't know why it's taking us all the way to the back of the filing, but the good news is I think actually the information is. So this, when I say like Amazon discloses a bit more at the segment level than other companies, it's basically this. It breaks things up: North America, international, AWS, and then consolidated is just a sum, right? So basically what it does is it tells you stuff, it's telling you more stuff about AWS than what a typical disclosure would give. And that basically, this is where the media reports come from, is if we take a look at operating income, AWS, whatever, I guess 13.5 billion. Right? Now look at the revenues. And we're not talking about small potatoes here, right? In 2020, I mean, hopefully it was pretty clear what I meant, right? Sum up, like North America plus international, sum that up together, that's Amazon non-AWS. It's everything about Amazon except for AWS. 2020, combined $340 billion in revenue, combined a little bit over 9 billion in profit. AWS, 45 billion in revenue, 13.5 billion in profit, right? Huge difference in margin. And given the fact that our earlier revenue forecasts had AWS continuing to grow faster than everything else, that gives us a story for increasing margins, yes? Right? And so if we pursue this path, we know that we're going to get a higher valuation. Right? So it gives us reason a priori to say, like, that assumption we made about margins in that first pass that was super naive, but at least super easy, it's likely probably to undervalue the company. Are we okay with this? Right, so let me show you what I do here. By the way, I give you links for anything that I didn't get from Bloomberg. I literally give you all of the links that I needed to use to populate all of my data so that you can replicate anything that I did. And if you find, you know, I could have made a mistake because I had to type in a lot of these numbers. I'm not asking you guys to check it's not worth your time, but broad spirit. I double check stuff. So, okay, but let's see. As I said, we've got North American. The data gave us North American revenue, North American EBIT, international revenue, international EBIT. So I just calculate margin numbers. And then there's AWS revenue, EBIT, and then the margins kind of calculated. So let's take a look at what we see. Margins of North American non-AWS. 3%, 2.7%, 5.1, 4.1, 3.6. I mean, you know, I think people can actually come up with different views here, and I don't even remember the assumption I made. Okay, so I just decided to just call this oscillation and not overthink it. So I'm like, you know, it goes up sometimes, you know, then seems to go down. I'm not overthinking, right? I didn't go do a fundamental deep dive on Amazon margins and all the things that are happening within Amazon that might have an impact on that going forward. So I just decided to say, like, this is not clearly trending up or trending down. So I'll just take the average of these things, and then I'll do that mean reversion thing like I did before. Okay. Again, you know, there's room for debate here. We okay with this so far? Yes.
So quick question. Do you read the management direction or discussion?
I mean, it's valuable. I mean, I'm curious to hear what they have to say, especially if they talk about initiatives that I think can move the needle in terms of, you know, again, you know, impacting market share or, you know, other things related. I mean, other things related to revenue growth and things related to market. I would check it out if I had time. Did I do it here? No, because I didn't have time.
Yeah, take it at face value or.
I will. Oh yeah. Thank you for saying that. The answer is no. No, I don't take these things at face value. Like, you know, you definitely want to like realize, like, you know, what is someone's incentive when they talk to you? By the way, you know, I will tell you, going back to this incentive thing, I know exactly why Amazon has deviated from the norm to present this data. Because they're like, we want people to know about this. Because this is the market believes this is a high growth part of our business, them knowing just how profitable this segment is helps us, right? So, meanwhile, you know, most companies don't give segment level profitability because they don't want to disclose that information to potential competitors, or they don't want like investors to start saying like, well, you know, your margin's a little bit lower than the margin of other companies are in this thing. You know, well, why are you guys so terrible? Right? Like they don't want that, right? Here, Amazon very clearly wants people to know how much AWS is rocking it. And they seem to be less interested in telling you the details of everything else. That's why they kind of aggregate it in this kind of weird way there, where they're not telling you about third party versus online store versus, you know, the physical stores that they apparently have in some parts of the world but not Montreal.
So why isn't AWS a separate company from their e-commerce business? Because like if there's Microsoft with its Azure cloud, it feels like there was the tech part there. But e-commerce is like the doing retailing and margin is very different from AWS. Would it somehow make some sense to do the separate?
I don't know. I haven't overly thought that thing. I think a lot of it has to do with history. You know, Jeff Bezos was really into those two things. and it seemed sensible to do AWS within Amazon. And by the way, like Amazon built up a lot of capacity, like a lot of technical capability, you know, through the technology they built to basically, you know, run their online store that was valuable in terms of capability and credibility for launching something like AWS. So I think like at the beginning, that actually made a difference. To get people to trust, like, I will use AWS for this. And they had spare capacity in terms of all of their hardware and stuff like that, like make more efficient use. So at the beginning, I can understand why it's the same, why it's done under one umbrella, right? So it's not just, you know, Jeff was into those two things. It's because, you know, if he put everything he was into Amazon, then they would also be a space company right now. What is it called? Like Blue Origin, right? So he didn't do that because it didn't seem to be natural synergies in that case. But there were some synergies early on with AWS. Whether that's still necessary, probably not, you know, but I don't know. I don't know well enough, but what I will say is I'm less focused on that in this exercise because whether they should be together or apart, I'm valuing them as they currently are. We okay with this? All right. So I said oscillating margins, so just mean revert. Basically, that means I'm not having the margins change essentially at all for that division. So far, so good. Bada boom. Let's see, international. What do I see with international? I see that it's trending up, right? But mainly trending up from a bad place, right? Negative margins. And, you know, now this seems like a special happy time, finally not negative. And so I end up saying the following. I'm like, look, this looks like it's trending up. You know, look, in the long term, maybe I expect the margins to be somewhat similar to what they're getting in North America. Okay, that's one perspective. Maybe this is not, I don't have a ton of conviction around that statement, but that's a view that I'm going to reflect here. So I just say to myself, like, okay, we're going to go from this number, and then we're going to go up, and in 5 years, we'll be at the North American level. Again, we can debate it. I don't have strong conviction here. It's not the most important thing in driving my results. Let's also be clear about that. So far, so good. So then I just take the blended margin between North American and international because I can blend it because I know the revenue. The revenue numbers in each case. What did I do there? I'm realizing for the forecast. Okay, so I did skip some steps. Sorry, I had forgotten about this. Because yes, I can get the historical numbers on breakdown North American international, right? But I don't have eMarketer helping me break it down for the future. So what I did is I took a stand on percentage revenue that's international. Interestingly enough, I didn't know this until I looked at the numbers. Percentage has been going down. So I'm just kind of projecting that it keeps going down, right? But that Amazon becomes, you know, more effective at getting a comparable margin on the stuff they keep. Maybe they've done too much shit internationally, and this percentage going down is a reflection of the fact that they're saying like there's some of that stuff we shouldn't do internationally, and they're doing that. I don't know. Send a LinkedIn message to Jeff Bezos and ask him. No, to hear from him. So I just kind of projected that down, and it's from these percentage numbers that I take so take that, and then I take my revenue forecast numbers, right? So I'm trying to connect things as much as possible, right? Where, you know, as I said, the reason, by the way, the reason why I aggregate them that way is because the way I split divisions last time, the way I'm splitting them here is different, right? Because what I know is that North American revenue plus international revenue from this table logically should be equal to what? Online store, third party, and other. from the last one. Because there's only one actual truly common component, which was AWS. So I subtract that from both sides. The sum of non-AWS on both sides should be the same. So I take the sum of those three things from my revenue forecast, and then take take this percentage of it to get my international revenue, and take 1 minus this of this to get this number. Folks okay with that? I mean, it's logical, right? I mean, there's also highlights, you do need to think a little bit carefully as you're kind of building this stuff, right? And then, so as I said, oscillation here, increasing here, where I take a stand 5 years, you're at the North American level. That might be a bit admittedly low conviction. And if I'm wrong, I'm willing to bet that it doesn't get quite this high. Okay, so that, yeah. So, what would that inform, given that I just openly stated this? If I got a final answer where I was like only a little bit above fundamental value, like my fundamental value was a little bit higher, but it's not like a truly strong, like, gotta do it type thesis, I would probably go back and do a sensitivity analysis on this assumption to see if it, if it screws with my conclusion on a buy, for instance. Like, that's the way that I think about it. Make sense? Okay, let's keep on going. So now with all of this information, I'm able to get my margin for everything that's not AWS. Right? And now I look at AWS. Again, my red numbers on revenue for AWS, those are the numbers, well, I even say it from my revenue forecast. So we found that before, I use that. And then I get margins for AWS, off of looking at, that information that Amazon disclosed in their financial statement. Again, if Amazon wasn't disclosed it, I would have to do more work, right? Find an industry report on margins, or look at comparables that are more pure plays in the industry, right? So hopefully we understand, like, many different ways to go. And so we do this, right? Like we see, right? Like 3.7% margin versus like 30% margin, right? Like, it's a huge difference. So like, we know we've got some, we don't expect margins. Like, no one in their right mind expects margins to stay constant, right? So my first pass assumption was, totally wrong. This one might be totally wrong too, but at least there are parts of it that make sense. If someone could look at this and say, this looks like it's trending up, right? Because this number here is lower than this mark here. Someone might focus a lot on this number and say, like, well, there was a pop-up. So someone can look at this and kind of say it's oscillation. Someone can look at it and say it's trending up. Do we kind of agree with that statement? Right? I'll pick the oscillation case. By the way, I don't have strong conviction there either, right? And I know if I was going to do the trend approach on this, I would get higher margins. So I know also that, like, doing a deeper dive there might influence my view. So this would be one of these things I would write down on the side and say, like, read up a little bit more to think about what might be happening to AWS margins. Because if it keeps on going up, or if it doesn't mean revert to an average that includes this period, like, you're going to get a higher valuation. More gravy on a buy. But I went oscillating. I kind of felt like I would go with the conservative of the two choices, given that I didn't have a strong view from the data. And that's where this came from. That's why it kind of ends here. The end here is like basic. I think it's the average of all of those things, but we can check. Yeah, average B7. Yeah, so I did the average of the whole window. We okay with this? Yeah. I don't know. Is this too much detail to be sharing, or I don't know. I can't really read the audience. Apparently, it's easier to read someone's mouth than their eyes. Probably here to say. Forget I said that. So yeah, but now we can just basically calculate our margin, right? Because we've got the margin forecast for each division. We've got the revenue breakdowns for the firm across each division. It's a simple weighted average, right, to get the margin. And so now I get margin 6.2, 6.5, 6.9, all the way up to 7.4. That's my margin forecast. And we know, like, low conviction, like the lowest conviction parts of the assumptions that I did, right? One was maybe a little bit too optimistic for international. And then the other one is maybe too pessimistic for AWS. So I've got two things that kind of work against, that in opposite directions, right? I think, my gut is, if I'm wrong, I'm probably more wrong because of being conservative on AWS. And I know AWS is really important here because AWS is really, at the end of the day, what's driving this margin increase. It's the thing. It's the thing. And that's why, that's really why Amazon wants everyone to know about it as much as possible about AWS, right? So it also makes sense within the narrative of what they're really happy to share. So I got these numbers. Those are the numbers I'm going to use in my second refinement. By the way, we can compare them to the margin forecast by analysts as well. And we can actually see, I did this work. We know exactly how I did it. My numbers are more pessimistic than the market. When I say the market, I mean analysts. But by the way, I wouldn't necessarily trust analysts either, right? We know what percentage of the time they say something's a buy versus a sell. Markets would have a real difficulty clearing if everyone listened to analysts, right? So like I actually usually, this is a personal opinion. In terms of the sanity check, look at analyst forecast, I actually tend to put more weight on revenue forecasts that they make than profit forecasts. Because I think they're less incentivized to fudge things towards optimism on revenues than on margins. But that's a view, okay? I'm just giving you guys a view. It could be like, ramblings of a madman or whatnot. I don't know. But figured I might as well share that. Yes, a deal, right? Yeah.
Why should you trust even the revenue forecast, considering that the bias is heavily skewed towards making you buy?
I mean, I'm just like.
It's also this bias that the more time.
No, right, that's right. I mean, let's put it this way. If I have a choice, I'm going to give you a cartoon view of the world, okay? Like, the world is more complicated than this. But let's view an analyst as, someone who they care about their reputation for making good forecasts, but at the same time, they care about making things look more valuable because when valuations are higher, their organization makes more money. Those two things are a little bit at odds. But if they have a choice, fudge A versus fudge B, where people will like pay attention to A, or there's like less justification for why you would be very off with A, right? Whereas people are more forgiving with mistakes you make on B, right? Then I'll fudge B instead of fudging A. I think if you're off by 1% with your margin, I don't think the market will kick you out of the club. But by the way, a 1% off in margin means 3.7% down to 2.7%, right? So being a little bit off has a big multiplier on valuation. See what I'm saying? Meanwhile, the analog of that mistake, if you just made it in revenue instead of margin, right? 3.7 to 2.7, that's loosely speaking 25% drop. If you're 25% off with your revenue forecast, being in or out of the club is not even your main concern, right? So maybe that's one way. I think you're more in order get a valuation oomph, you need to be fudging like the difference in the number, what happened versus what you forecasted needs to be really big. Right? Again, like I would just say the following, like in which case would you think the analyst is a bigger dumbass? If he said margins are going to be 3.7% and they were 2.7%, or if he said revenue is going to be 370 billion and it ended up being 270 billion. Which of the two cases are you like, I'm not listening to you anymore? It's way more the latter, right? So again, this is not a fact. This is an opinion. But are folks okay with, the work I did and kind of like the broad strategy of trying to use the data that's available to get a sense of changing margins? My second refinement now, I copy pasted the first refinement, pasted it in, and then only changed one thing, the margin numbers. That's it. Because it's a template style, everything else automatically calculates. Sound good? All right. Let's continue then. As I said, there's 4 refinements. My last 3 refinements are trying to do a better job to the very, very low bar I set in my first pass surrounding terminal value calculations. So it may be worthwhile quickly refreshing our memory on what assumptions I made with my terminal value stuff. By the way, so I've done 2 terminal value calculations. That's why you see 2 valuations up top. One was with terminal multiple, one was with terminal growing perpetuity. What assumptions did I make with each? Both of them very bad cartoons. For terminal value, what I did was I said, let's assume the terminal multiple is going to be the multiple that Amazon has right now. Okay, I did it because that's a really easy number to get. 27.7 is the. By the way, just in turn to be clear, I'm using EV to EBITDA as my multiple. Okay, so I just got it because it's fast. It's really stupid to use that number, because Amazon is a high growth company. We do not believe they're going to continue growing at quite the same rate in perpetuity, right? And so because of that, we expect its its multiple to fall over time. Okay. So I know, like, my choice of using a terminal multiple of 27.7 is like, it's too optimistic. Okay. I have no doubt about it. And so with the terminal value number, I know like there's this kind of big piece here. And by the way, just for shits and giggles, percentage of this valuation from my first pass that came from the early cash flows versus the present value of the terminal value, like 94% of the value comes from the terminal value. So the fact that I'm too optimistic here is probably not like a little error, right? So like, I know I need to do a better job here. I need to assume something about like Amazon is not quite as mature anymore. Probably it needs to have some sort of lower multiple. So by the way, that is why this number is so damn high. The number I got for the multiple being twice the number of its actual valuation, I know the main reason for that. It's because I just like did this like the easiest but stupidest thing with my terminal multiple. All right, I know that. But I want to keep things simple and iterate with like bite-sized pieces kind of thing. Are we okay so far? You had a question, right?
Yeah, what percentage coming from the terminal value is acceptable typically?
Now, there's no acceptable, unacceptable number here, right? So I didn't say I don't believe this number is true. What I said is because this percentage is really big, I know that like a material mistake here is likely to matter a lot. But like different companies can have wildly different percentages, right? growth companies, the numbers are going to be big. Companies that are losing money right now, the number is going to be bigger than 100%. Uber, bigger than 100%. Right? So I wouldn't think of it that way. It isn't, but I don't want to dismiss your question because it is actually an interesting question. Like, it would be useful, right? If you specialize in a particular type of company, right? High growth companies that went public over the last 5 years in the enterprise software as a service space. Like, if I wanted to be like mega serious about being like an expert on this, I might actually want to ask myself that question. What does this percentage breakdown typically look like for companies like that? Because now that becomes a more homogeneous question, where then you can look at your model and how it gives you, what sort of percentages does it give? Is it way out of whack with what the normal percentage is? And if it is way out of whack, you want to ask yourself, do you believe yourself? Or do you think that this is a sign that you made some bad assumptions somewhere? So you're asking a good question. It's just one that we need to zone in on in a more targeted manner than just asking it very broadly. What about growing perpetuity? So growing perpetuity, what assumption did I make? With the growing perpetuity, I assumed the cash flows would grow at 2.5% per year in perpetuity once we hit our end date. 2.5%, where am I taking that? That's like actually a fairly standard number to use for long-term growth rate of the aggregate stock market. Okay, it's in the ballpark. Basically you'll see between 2 and 4%. Okay, so by the way, I'm using this number, right? It doesn't take like a finance Einstein to realize, like, man, that seems pretty damn pessimistic. You think that Amazon in 5 years would just all of a sudden become like just growing like the market? I'm too optimistic in the first one, but this one's too pessimistic, right? Do we agree with that statement? So like, I also know, like, this number here is going to be too low. By the way, even with this low number, going back to your question, even with this pessimistic number, it's still 86%. Wait, this goes to 11:55, correct? Yes. Okay. All right. So folks kind of see, like, it's pretty obvious that the assumptions that were made in the first pass on terminal value were not very good. We should be able to do a better job, right? Now, what was the heart of why we thought they were bad? In both cases, but coming from being wrong from different ends of the spectrum. It's that we view Amazon as a high growth company that is going to be transitioning to becoming a more mature company, right? But we don't expect like that transition to be super stark all of a sudden in year 5. It'll probably take longer, right? But we also don't expect it to be growing at quite the same rate that it's growing now as reflected in its margin right now. So in one case, we were like assuming the good growth days will continue forever. And then in the other case, we were assuming they're stopping suddenly in year 5. So we're kind of wrong from different ends. So how can we do a better job? By the way, there's a bunch of different ways to do a better job, right? Some way, go ahead.
Sorry, just have a quick question about the multiple. So for the terminal multiple, is that it says like the company estimate from Bloomberg. Is that just the company's current? I think I missed. Is that the company's current multiple? Or
It's
like,
EV to EBITDA right now.
oh, so it's not like a comp set, right?
No, it's its own. It's literally, I looked up one number.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't use comp at all here. Yeah, there's literally, I make zero use of comparables here. If I wanted to talk comparables, another 2 weeks.
You're assuming that would stay constant throughout the until.
Well, I mean, when you do this hybrid valuation where you get a terminal value from a multiple, I mean, all you're really doing is you're assuming that the multiple will be that number at that date. If it's that number now, yes, I would take that further statement that you make, which is you're kind of assuming it's staying constant over time, right? Now, by the way, it's actually nice to mention this because look, there are some companies that are mature where we don't expect their multiples to necessarily change over time, right? You're like a totally mature company, your growth rate is like, you're like, you know, Gordon Growth Co. You guys know the Gordon Growth model, right? Or Benjamin, or you know, you were born with knowledge. Not so long ago. By the way, so like there's this, I'm doing two refinements, and I'll actually point out two things. Right, what I've been explaining so far is I've been explaining something about the life cycle of a company, right? Life cycle of a company, you know, high growth companies generally gradually transition to mature companies, right? And assuming your multiple is going to stay constant there makes no sense because as you mature, your multiple falls, right? But by the way, even companies that are truly mature, does it always make sense to assume their multiple is going to stay constant over time? Literally, assume the most mature, constant company one could possibly imagine. Would you always say, I expect multiple to stay constant over time? No, why not, Simone?
Competitors,
Huh?
the possibility of new competitors, regulation, like.
Okay, but it's so steady, like we don't need to worry about that shit.
Maybe changing the discount rate.
Exactly, right? So, yeah, I mean, I don't want to dismiss what you said because what you said is true, but I was dismissing that in my own weird Giro definition of steady, right? What I wanted was Kuyang's answer, which is even if I'm not worried about that, everything's steady, right? Market conditions can change. If discount rates go up, multiples are going to fall, even if my company doesn't change, right? So there's also this question, right? So when I'm thinking about refining, this is why I do two refinements, by the way. My first refinement focuses on Amazon and its life cycle. My second refinement is going to be focused on changes in macro finance conditions because I believe discount rates are damn low right now. They won't be damn low forever. Yeah. So actually, that previews the second, the fourth refinement as well. But in our third refinement right now, I'm only going to try to tackle one of those things, which is life cycle of Amazon. It is not, you know, life is not a two-stage growth model, right? Transition and growth is a more gradual thing. And the transition is unlikely to be happening exactly in 5 years with Amazon. So far, so good. So what I'm going to do, I do the simplest thing instead of a two-stage growth model. I do a kind of like three-stage growth model. But let me explain what I do here. So I'll do the perpetual growth model first. And here I'll actually just kind of talk more at a high level through it instead of like going like entry by entry. Okay. But let me explain what I basically do. I want a terminal value, right? But instead of terminal value using a growing perpetuity at the terminal date, right? So terminal value at time t, actually, I'm not sure if I'm too close. Terminal value at time t equals cash flow t plus 1 over r minus g. Instead, what I'm going to do, I'm going to get a terminal value where I'm going to say, once you hit your terminal date, you are now a two-stage company. So that you'll have an earlier period where you're still kind of high growth. And then a few periods later, I'm just using 5 years. Why 5 years? Okay, that's it. That's my reason. Never acknowledge it in marketing materials. But in any case, but you guys see what I'm saying? I'm going to treat it as not as a simple growing perpetuity, which is like you're now a one-stage mature at the terminal date. I'm going to treat it as a two-stage at the terminal date. That make sense? And how am I going to treat it as a two-stage? I'm going to look at the like my cash flow forecast. My cash flow forecast, by the way, these these are forecasts because it starts at 2021 all the way to 2025. So apologies if this confused a little bit. Like this was a forecast before, but the new forecasts I'm adding are what happens to cash flows the next 5 years after that, which is like that first stage in the two-stage at the terminal date. It sounds more complicated than it is, right? Are folks okay with what I'm saying here? And so I'm just looking like in my forecast that I've already done so far, what was my growth rate of cash flows over time? Oh, it was like 75%, then pretty sharply down 26, 24, 22, 20. Okay, so I'm looking at that. And then I say to myself, well, I think it'll keep going down. I just don't think it's going down to 2.5% all of a sudden right here. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to say, look, I'm going to make my number continue to fall from this one, but gradually fall over the next 5 years to 2.5. So that's the first pass. Seems okay? I guess if I call everything first pass, no one ever disagrees with a first pass, right? So yeah, so all I did is I made this number go down to this number, which is my long-term number, in line with long-term growth numbers for the market as a whole, or for the economy. But just transitioned it like this. And so that gives me this, right? So I get these numbers first, and then I use these numbers to go from this number to this number. So you know, this number to this number using this number to this number using that, yada, yada. And then now I'm at 2.5% in year 2031. So from that period on, I can go Gordon growth, perpetuity formula. Make sense? We do that, we get a terminal value of this number. That's one terminal value. We okay with this? Now I do something very similar with my terminal value from a terminal multiple, which is and but I just need to like even remember some of these numbers here. Right, so what am I going to do? I'm going to first get a terminal multiple at time t plus s. I haven't even told you what I mean, but t is our terminal date in 5 years. S is the length of that middle period, right? The second of the 3 phases that I effectively have in total in my market, which I said was another 5 years. So instead of trying to answer the question, what is the multiple in 5 years? Instead, I actually try to answer something that you guys might be like, sounds even more difficult to do. But I'm going in 10 years instead of in 5 years now. Are we okay with this? But why? Because I'm like, I feel a little bit more comfortable picking a multiple that I think Amazon will have in 10 years, because I feel more confident that in 10 years, it's going to be like a mature company that looks more like the S&P 500. And so what do? That multiple in 10 years is the S&P 500 multiple, but I'm using the one right now. So going back to Quient, I'm ignoring the fact that I actually also believe multiples will fall in 5 and 10 years. So that's being ignored here completely, because I'm using the market multiple right now for the S&P 500 as my estimate of what the market multiple in this Amazon's mature multiple will be in 10 years. There's leaps there, right? So 17.47. Now what do I do next? What do I do next? I don't even remember. So I have, I look at my EBITDA numbers for my forecast. And then I may have like, this probably should say EBITDA growth. So I'm just going to check. Yeah. So sorry, there's a typo here. This number should have been year-on-year EBITDA growth. As you can imagine, I copy paste a lot, and sometimes I forget to change some words here and there. But then I use these numbers and then I say, look, this is my year-on-year EBITDA growth in the last period, and I phase transition that down to 2.5% as well at maturity. Like when a company is mature, it's revenue growth, it's cash flow growth, it's EBITDA growth, all of those things. Once you are truly mature, Gordon growth style, they all should be going up by the same rate. So make that go down to that. Use those numbers to get EBITDA forecast. Obviously, I need to have EBITDA forecast to be able to calculate a terminal value with an EBITDA based multiple, right? So that's why I need to forecast these things. So that's, I get my forecast for 2021 that way. And then what did I do here? Let me take a look quick. Take my EBITDA numbers. You know what? This is wrong. Yeah, wrong. Too much copy pasting. How should I get my, right? I'm getting my terminal value at time 10. I'll fix it, by the way. And typo. This is a silly mistake because when I copy pasted what I had above and pasted it here and then changed these numbers, I forgot the fact that I should change what I'm taking a present value. This label is actually correct, but this automatically corrected to this where it should. But what am I saying? Let me be actually clear. I want to make sure we understand this. I'm trying to get terminal value at time 5. This is my T, right? And what I'm getting first is a terminal value at time 10, which is T plus S, right? I get that. How do I get this number in my second approach? I find EV to EBITDA, right? That was my 17.7 times my own forecast of EBITDA, which is why I had to create this table because I didn't have it anywhere else before. So times the whatever that number is, times my EBITDA forecast for time 10, 2031. That's how I get this. That's how I get this number. Now, but I want a terminal value at this point in time. How do I get a terminal value at this point in time? I discount this by 5 periods to bring it from 10 to 5, yes. But then what do I need to add? It's not the EBITDA at time 1, EBITDA at time 2, EBIT, right? I need to take the present value of the cash flows at those times. Cash flow at time 1 over 1 plus R to the 1. Sorry, it's times 6 plus cash flow times 7, 1 plus R, 7 plus all the way up to plus cash flow at time 10 over 1 plus R to the 5. Right. So do we agree? Like this is how I should be getting my my terminal value at time 10. It's still a terminal multiple base, but it's terminal multiple as of time 10 as opposed to time 5. I always need to fill in the blank with cash flow if those two numbers are not the same date, right? But what I unfortunately neglected to do when I copy pasted here is I didn't, right? The way I had defined my formula up here. By the way, I think it's good to show this because it also shows how easy it is to kind of make stupid screw ups. Is I just literally copy pasted this, pasted it down there, and then just focused on changing these numbers to EBITDA. But then the thing is, once I change those numbers, it also automatically changed those ones to be present value, not of cash flows, but present value of EBITDAs, which is not what you want to be doing. You guys see what I'm saying? Right? So I think it's actually, there's a more lesson from this mistake than there is from having it done well in the first place. But what I should have actually done here is I should have just made this correction after the copy paste. So, so let me show you here. I should have actually done it to this, boom, and then drag that down to here, and then I get this number. Yeah, well, like how does that number change? It's gone down. How down? You know, not a big mistake, only about $170 billion. No one cares about that. $650 million for a not very useful election. Who cares about that? Okay, you guys may disagree. Yeah, whatever. Okay, so 17 point, okay, so I just corrected it. I'll post the correction, okay? Do as I say, not as I do, so don't make my silly mistakes. But by the way, you will find it is really easy to make silly mistakes like that when you're trying to save that copy pasting. You just kind of build that habit of fixing that stuff. But are we okay with what I've done here? Right? And so now we've got this terminal value at time 5 now, and this way, again, big picture, what did we do? We did our terminal value at the end using a 2-stage instead of just a, naive Gordon or naive like plain vanilla comp valuation or terminal, multiple valuation. It's a multiple valuation, not a comp valuation. Our comp was our self before, our past self. Well, with this, we are now, done with refinement 3, right? This is my so-called 2-stage multiples-based valuation, and the other one above was my 2-stage pure cash flow based valuation, where I end with a terminal perpetuity, but in the 2nd stage. Yeah, go ahead.
So how far you're forecasting out is dependent on the stage and the life cycle of the company?
I mean, to be honest, like, like most common is to go 5 years for things. Like that's literally the most common by far. You see 3 to 7. Sometimes people go more ambitious, 10. Like I don't want to like pretend that this is like overly scientific. It's a lot of it is rule of thumb based. I mean, again, if you are like enough of an expert in an industry, then you may have a view of like how far you can go with that industry. But I'm not enough of an expert on any given industry, even stuff in technology that I'm interested in, where I'm going to give you like a really well-baked answer to that. So I'll just lay it out like that.
Okay.
Sorry to disappoint. All right. So you do that. Now we have these valuations. And by the way, at this stage, now I start looking at my numbers. Why do I start looking at my numbers? I'm feeling like I'm pretty close because I did everything except for thinking about how market conditions might change, how discount rates might fall, how multiples might fall, not because of Amazon, but because of macro finance. And so I'm like, now I'm curious, if I ignore a view that discount rates might go up essentially, like, what number do I get? And so I get, between, by the way, correcting my mistake makes my valuations closer to each other, which I also get peace of mind from. Let's be clear too. But in any case, whatever, average of these two things is about 2.15 billion roughly, right? So I see if I'm completely not thinking about the possibility that discount rates rise, it seems like I'm getting a number higher than what the market price is. And I'm like, well, that actually kind of makes sense, because if people are worried that discount rates will go up, I don't think many people are betting that they'll go even more down. So there seems to be like an asymmetry there, right? Like I would expect, I would like to see that the market, under the assumption of a constant discount rate and constant multiples for mature companies, that the market as a whole will have an EV to EBITDA of 17 point something. Like that's like historically really, really high. I don't think that's going to continue. I don't think it's going to be the case in 10 years. So I actually get some comfort in seeing that like my numbers here that don't think about that at all seem too high. So now let's think about variance. By the way, here I changed deeper exploration, changes marked in blue, but like especially I think with my my perpetuity thing, but I just didn't have enough time to like fully think through like what would be even a good first pass set of changes. So there's a, here, like there's a lot of stuff where we can have different perspective on stuff. So I'm changing discount rates. Like remember the whack I got from just log on to Bloomberg, AMZN, US equity, click, whack, click, number, enter into Excel. That's right. It was 7 point. I think it was maybe 7.1%, but I don't totally remember. So let's dig that up first pass. Where are you? Oh, it's going to be on the side. Maybe somewhere here. 7.1%. So that's what Bloomberg was saying at the time. Right. So now thinking about time variation and discount rates. What have I changed? Instead of using 7.1% everywhere, I seem to have decided 9.4% as a long-term whack, right? Yeah, I'll have to check. I don't remember all the details because there's two numbers floating here. I'm not. So this is the average of Amazon's whack over the last 5 years, because in the whack function in Bloomberg, you can also get a chart where it shows you the number on a year-by-year basis. So I just kind of looked at the average of that stuff instead of just looking at the number right now. What else did I look at here? This is the most ad hoc part. I took that number and made it go down by 1.5%. That's just me saying like, Amazon will be a little bit less risky when they mature as well. So there should be this one thing that pushes their whack down, but there's something that pushes their whack up as well, which is that we expect discount rates in general to go up. That's kind of what I'm saying here. And that's what kind of gives me a more long-term whack. And so I use those as my discount rates, starting in year 5, I think, but let me just double check. Yeah, okay, so this is what I'm doing, is I'm in this valuation model here, right? Like, think of like my model now effectively has 3 discount rates. A discount rate from 0 to 5, a discount rate from 6 to 10, and a discount rate from 11 to infinity, right? And so 0 to 5, I keep using 7.1%. 6 to 10, I use 9.45%, which is kind of like market conditions go back to more of a historical average than the really low numbers right now. But Amazon hasn't matured yet, so it's not like less risky as typically matured companies are. And then I take this more in line with historical norm number and reduce it by about 1.5%, just to reflect like maturation. Those are my 3 phases of discount rates. And with those 3 phases of discount, like, so this would be like the middle phase discount rate, right? This is also the middle phase. But for instance, when I do terminal value at time 10 with a perpetuity, it's cash flow 11 over R long term, which was that 7.9% or something, minus G stable, which I'm still taking that G stable to be 2.5% like I did before, just in line with pretty standard choice. Folks, see what I've done here, right? Again, this captures, more like whack during more normal times. This captures maturation. Capturing maturation, I particularly did ad hoc, and I even acknowledged it. I just didn't have the time to overthink that. Okay? Yes?
This is specific, this method is specific to Amazon because this is kind of a newish sector that's maturing. It's not necessarily the approach that you would use for, the typical car manufacturer.
Yeah, no, absolutely, right? Like this is like the generalizability of the details I've done here are, they apply in some places and not elsewhere. So I would say this applies to high growth companies, right? Yeah, right. A mature company, like, fewer judgment calls to make, I think. For the terminal multiple, I still, like, for the terminal multiple, I actually don't need to get this I don't need to use this long-term number, right? Because I'm not getting the terminal value from a perpetuity. I'm getting it from a terminal multiple. But before I use the terminal multiple of the S&P 500 right now, instead of using the terminal multiple of the S&P 500 right now, I'm using the average of that multiple over the last 5 years, right? So I'm averaging out the last 5 year number. That's where I get that. Yeah, why 5 years? Okay. And just to be consistent with my prior valuation, because in my terminal value approach, I still need to have that middle discount rate, right? So I use the same middle discount rate that I used in my other valuation, the 9.4 or something %. And so I do that, I get a terminal value of this and a terminal multiple of 19.5, right? So notice, like, terminal multiple now in my more refined approach that captures changes in Amazon and captures changes in market conditions, that brought my multiple from the first pass, 27.7, and it brought it down to 19.5, right? So it made it go down by about 33%. And now I'm done. I probably do need to fix this cell again. So this cell yet again needs to be fixed. It's not I-36. It is, come on. It should be this number, right? So because I copy paste everything, I make a mistake in one place, I'm making it over and over again. No. So I actually, now I changed my quote a little bit. It actually went down to 17.7, even more. Okay. Save that. Now we can now embed that refinement into our valuation as well. And now, now this is actually, it's looking even better than it kind of did before, because 177 million, 1.77 trillion. Wow, if we just report two numbers, 1.77 trillion, 1.66 trillion, like, that's my end result. On average, if I average those two, I'm a little bit low compared to the market, about 3.2% lower, but my view is like that damn close. Okay. So where do we stand at the end of this work? Hopefully you guys feel everything that I did to try to improve was doing a refinement that we a priori believed through our first sensitivity analysis was important to do. And B, that, like, without digging too much into the details of the company, because I didn't have the time to do that. Like, what I did was actually pretty, like, I think it's sensible, like, as a generic set of things to do for high growth companies, right? So that, like, you don't feel like what I'm doing is kind of like reverse engineering stuff to make a point or something like that. But, like, it was actually kind of like, I wasn't focused on these end numbers. Okay. So hopefully the steps felt natural, logical, and sensible. But again, there's a big thing missing here, is all of the stuff I did lacked, the ingenuity necessary to come up with an assessment of the impact of a novel investment thesis. There's nothing novel here, right? Right. Right. So to me, like this, what am I thinking when I'm done at this stage in this last 1 minute? I'm saying to myself, like, I actually think my model does a decent job capturing market views. By the way, someone mentioned to me at the end of last class when I because I think I said the same thing then as well. And someone was like, well, just because you're at close to the current price. Oh, by the way, I think Amazon's price has fallen since I last noticed, so I may be, they may be down 3.2%. That's why I chose not to invest in Amazon over the last 2 weeks. Let's be clear. Just because you provide an explanation for the current price or something that's in the neighborhood of that doesn't mean you have the correct interpretation, because there's so many levers. I may have done every lever incorrectly, but I'm just like the lucky fool who just balanced everything out wrong so that it came out right. Okay, so keep that in mind, right? But nonetheless, because I felt all the things I did were like justifiable and things that I think are like accessible enough that like serious people should be thinking about those things anyway. Like it gives me a sense of comfort that I kind of have a sense of the market view. This model, it kind of building the market view. Again, caveats, right? I mentioned them already, right? And so if we view this as kind of like our best attempt at a consensus model, what do I really like about this? It's our starting point, right? So we're done with level 1, because now we start really asking ourselves, what do we disagree in this model that moves the needle, and why? How good of a case can we make, either logically or quantitatively, that some of these things will be wrong? And when we think through those things, do those things push fundamental value up to a material amount? If the answer is yes, this strikes me as a well thought through thesis, right? And yeah, among other things, when you're trying to come up with your less obvious thesis, it can help to do deep dives into some of the stuff the company gives, look at management discussions on stuff. But again, buyer beware, because they'll tell you the stuff that they think they benefit from telling you. Find other sources, right? But I actually find it useful to put context around your thesis vis-a-vis this model, right? So actually, this is not search for alpha. This is, kind of qualifying you to start searching for alpha, I almost say, right? Searching for alpha, much more difficult. But I think it's easier to have clarity on what you think and why you think you should take a position after you've done something like this. So I think this is useful. All right. So I hope you guys found this helpful. Stuck pretty close to time. Have a good, we will see each other again someday.